Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 152. Thank you for joining us. Today, Jordan returns to the Kolbecast for what we like to call our co-host confab. When we get together, there's no telling which direction the conversation will turn. Today, we reflect on the life and contributions of Dianne Muth, one of Kolbe's founders who passed away earlier this year. We also discuss the founding principles that guide Kolbe Academy and the wonderful fruit of homeschooling. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, liturgical musician, popcorn and podcast fanatic, and Kolbe homeschooling mom to 4 lads and lasses of middle and high school age.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and director of development for Kolbe Academy.
Stephen and I have Jordan back with us on the podcast today for a bit of a catch-up. Hi, Jordan. How are you?
I'm good. Glad to be back.
It's good to see you. I haven't visited with you in a while. I'm glad it's working out today.
Me too.
Stephen, how are you?
Doing well. Yeah, it's these are some of my favorite podcasts where I just get to sit down with 2 of my favorite Kolbe people and get to have a conversation. Now, I think I meet with each of you separately, and we just get to sit down and chat each week. But it's nice to have everyone together.
Thank you. And likewise, yes, these are some of our favorite conversations, and we hear from folks that they're some of our listeners' favorite conversations. All right. So since this group got together last for a podcast conversation, we've had lots happening in the school year and in the Kolbe community. We have bid farewell to our last living co-founder of Kolbe Academy, Mrs. Dianne Muth. We have been praying for her, the repose of her soul, since she passed from this life earlier this year. There were several things that happened around that time that the Kolbe community was able to participate in. Rosary and liturgy and prayers and so forth. And we ask for continued prayers for her and her loved ones and everybody affiliated with Kolbe as we continue to celebrate her legacy and pray in thanksgiving for all she has given to us and left with us. So what do you all think? Any more thoughts around that? It's been so beautiful and moving to see how the community has come together in Mrs. Muth's final days on earth and in her passing, and how just hearing some of the reminiscences. Do you all have any favorites you want to share?
There was one that involved Stephen and I together last year where we got the chance. We were both out in Napa for some meetings, and we got the chance to interview her for the podcast. And she was sharp as ever. I mean, it was a lot of fun. She had talked about skydiving, which she had a plan to do skydiving a little bit more, but I think the first time that she did it, she was 70, and the next time 80, something like that. And she was going to do it on her 90th birthday, and her plan was to do it in Hawaii. So she was an amazingly adventurous woman, both in reality, but also spiritually. I mean, she was so devout and inspiring to be around her. She is one of the few people that I've met where I come away thinking that person is saintly. I'll say personally, one of my favorite things about her was my daughter Jojo, who's now 8 years old, but when she was a baby, she was very, very sick in Germany. And we had asked the Kolbe community to pray for her. And it was scary. It was like life-threatening illness that she had. And Mrs. Muth always asked about her whenever I would see her, if I'd happen to need to call her something Kolbe related. Her first thing was, how is Jojo? How is Jojo? And so she was always praying for Jojo. And I'm sure, I'm sure she was doing that for many, many people. And so she was a real prayer warrior. And, we're going to miss her so much. We're so grateful for everything. And I'll truly miss talking with her just every time we're back there. I loved catching up with her. She's one of my favorite people.
Yeah, there was, as you're talking about that little recording that we were doing out in Napa, it just stands out to me as my impressions of Mrs. Muth in my limited time that I got to spend with her. But the first day of recording, after the first day of recording, she came back and she said, I forgot some things that I really wanted to get in there. And it just came up that the day that we recorded was her fasting day. And so she, sort of wasn't quite, didn't have all those things in my mind. But after I thought about it, then just wanted to, it's like, yeah, the fasting day. All right. Okay. But it just, there's just such a strength there too. And I see people like from that, I think what are her generation, that just this love for the church and the faith, that they were willing to do things for the church and the faith that were out of the box, but they're tenacious about it in a way, which is impressive to me. Just that, I mean, I think of Kolbe, my family's origins with like the starting of Thomas Aquinas College, which was in the late 60s, early 70s. But they're doing things that are going to be essential for the church and for our country going forward. And they were thinking about it back then. And now we're seeing, kind of the blow up of what happens when you don't go down that road. But it's their work that's really gives us a chance, for going forward, which is, thank you for those people who would do those things, right?
That's a great point, Stephen, that generation, think about how pioneering some of these things were then, a lot of trails that had never been blazed before. She herself is the one who should be credited with Maximilian Kolbe as our patron. I mean, she was, I asked her several times, like, to retell the story, but they chose, and she had proposed it at a meeting, they chose St. Max as our patron before he was canonized. So speaking of forward thinking, and that was her own research and some kind of connection she felt to him, and it set the tone for what we do here at Kolbe.
I never got the opportunity to meet her in person, but I had a few phone conversations with her early on in our homeschooling days. We were discussing composition and language arts, which were some of her areas of expertise and specialty. And some advice she gave me sticks with me today. Just the connection with her, talking on the phone, that also worked wonders for me in moving forward with an area that I was really uncertain about and needing some extra dose of confidence. So grateful for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would add, like, that idea of confidence. She did it across the board, big picture, little picture, anything. There was an interview that we did with her. I'm sure you can find it online somewhere on our YouTube channel or something. I'm sure it's there, but where she felt this real optimism for the future. And it was contagious from her. And it's new sort of for me, because growing up before I became Catholic, everything was that the world was close to ending. I mean, that was how we thought. We believed in the rapture, like the Left Behind series type theology is what I grew up with. And from her, it was totally opposite. And she would say, I'll never live to see it. But she believed in it because of institutions like Kolbe, because of the good people that make them work, and especially because out of obedience, having large families and then sending the kids to schools where Newman Guide colleges or whatever, where they're meeting, and it's just it's creating new families for the future. And she really believed in that. And I think we will see the fruits of that definitely in the next generation.
The humility as well, to me, stands out, is remarkable. And I've seen this in Kolbe, just, not just Mrs. Muth, but other people. It's really somewhat remarkable. I mean, you did this great thing, you kind of like to, but, there she was, still coming in to open mail and do things and just trying to help in whatever way she still could when I saw her last year, at least. But yeah, just remarkable.
Well, I'm grateful to have the recordings that we do of her, the interviews that you've done with her and the conversations you've had. We'll put some links in our show notes for people to see those, and along with links to the funeral rites that were celebrated for her. Some of those were live streamed for people who were not able to be there in person. So we'll have some of that in our show notes for this episode. So Mrs. Muth, thank you so much. God bless you. And we are praying for you, and we ask for your prayers for us as we carry on here. So thank you so much for that. All right. So in other matters, last time we were talking, Jordan, you had some articles being published on the Prime Matters website. What have you been hearing in response to those?
The feedback that I've gotten is really good. I mean, from some of them from unexpected places. I have 2 articles with them so far. My goal for 2023 was to publish 4 more in Prime Matters, but I'm kind of behind. If I was thinking, well, 1 every quarter or something like that. But I mean, it's an awesome opportunity, I think, and it's the right forum for some of the ideas that I've been thinking of. I really appreciate Prime Matters and what they're doing, not just what I'm putting out there, but the other content that they have, I think, is really, really good and relevant for a lot of people who are trying to make sense of things in our world today. But I will get back on those. I'd like to continue the series. So I have some new ideas that I've been kicking around, and it's just a matter of getting the time. As a teacher, though, it's like this is the time of year where you're just chomping at the bit to get to finals week. As much as I love the students, I'm going to miss many of them. I can't say every single one, but many of them. I'm going to really enjoy the time to get focused on some of that stuff again.
Yeah. Do you stick to a pretty similar routine of summertime writing that, like, do you use like the time you had spent teaching class? Do you use that for your writing or research or things like that? Or does the whole thing kind of change with family life depending on what's going on?
Yeah, I in the summer I am able to really set aside, and that's what I found I need these big, like, kind of chunks of time to really develop something consistently. So during the year, it's difficult to get that. It's just difficult because of family obligations and basketball practices and hockey practices, and to really block that time, everything's dedicated really towards teaching and other kinds of meetings and things, administrative work. But in the summer, when I get freed up, I feel like I make a ton of progress. And so I started last summer, I started 2 books, and I felt like, well, I'll be able to keep some semblance of this routine if I just wake up, 3 hours earlier than normal or something crazy like that. But it just doesn't, I can't sustain it for a lot of different reasons. But in the summer, so like this summer, I'm excited to get right back on those projects. And the one is the one we've talked about a lot, the Franz Reinisch translation. And I feel like there's a chance I could knock it out over these weeks during the summer. And I think that'll be priority number 1 for me, aside from Prime Matters articles. Yeah, that would be I feel called to get this done as quickly as I can.
Yeah.
And we're in the process of discussing some of the pillars of Kolbe, and we'll be doing that at some of our meetings with some of the other leaders throughout Kolbe as well. But we've been talking about that, Jordan, and I'm sure we'll have more of those this summer. And you're doing a lecture, right, for during the summer that'll bring in some of those Ignatian principles. Is that?
Right? Yeah. We really kind of pared down some of the pillars. I think Stephen and I have been involved in kind of identifying what are the pillars of Kolbe, and it's not even necessarily what are our ideas now, but we're both very sensitive to the founding of Kolbe, speaking of Mrs. Muth and all that. And part of it is, I had the opportunity to look at what is Ignatian. We call ourselves Ignatian method, and it's a broad definition of what Ignatian means, Ignatian education. And lucky for us, one of the other founders, Francis Crotty, had put together a few documents in the 80s and early 90s on how to implement Ignatian education. And so I was able to sort of take a few of his ideas and turn it into a lecture that I'll do it at a conference this summer on techniques for generating self-activity or promoting self-activity in the classroom. And that was really one of the things that Francis Crotty was very interested in when they set up the private school, the day school in Napa, was how do we get students involved in the learning process and talking. So it's 7 techniques. So keep an eye out for those. I'm sure they'll appear in various forms on the blog or somewhere on the website down the road. But it's giving us a chance to have a look at this stuff and really be able to articulate it and define it, hopefully for many years to come.
Yeah, looking at those big picture things have been both exciting for me. I just really love it. Talking about all of those things that can guide decisions for what you're trying to do. But we've talked with my father-in-law being one of the founders of Thomas Aquinas College. I just see that I think you were mentioning this, Jordan, as well, that we're in the world today is different because there's been a slow buildup, a slow development in education and things. It's kind of like the idea that you can boil frogs in water if you just slowly heat it up. And what we're seeing today, I think, in a lot is a result of all of these small things that have been building for years and years. And what we're talking about back in those 60s, the 70s and such, with some of those, people were seeing that then, and they started these things like Kolbe I think in the 80s for Kolbe, but Thomas Aquinas College in the 69, 70s that were counteracting those things. So it's now fun to kind of go back and look at some of those founding documents, like Francis Crotty's document, or I go to TAC's founding documents and reread that and see the wisdom that they were setting a new course. And there's a clarity there that I think is easier to follow because they're not where we're at right now. So there are certain principles that you could still grasp a hold of and not have to, search through the weeds here so much like we have today. But it's been a lot of fun to look at some of those again.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to they could more easily maybe justify their existence, justify why start this new thing, whereas we almost have to jump through a bunch of hoops to say, like, here's why we still exist, here's why we're still around, or here's why start something new. Whereas for them, they really did have a clarity. It almost reminds me of my own parents, my mother deciding to homeschool us and without any kind of resources, but like, this is right and let's do it. It would be in some ways more challenging, especially you don't have a model to follow and you just gotta, you gotta do it yourself. That is what's really impressive, I think, about that generation. And I've really enjoyed working with Stephen on this. And it feels like we've just begun in a way. We're just scratching the surface of some of our pillars. So there's the Ignatian component, and then there's the one that Stephen is more engaged in, probably would be like the classical component, because we're Catholic classical customized or have been our taglines. But this classical component itself is something that needs to be addressed, it seems, right, Stephen?
Yeah, well, I think there's just so many different views about what is classical education, and that's where it's kind of fun, where you have to start making distinctions or whatever. But like you said, it's going back to see, well, what was Kolbe's view of classical too, and what were their, and why, because today classical is the big, like, it seems like a lot of schools just want to you can just throw classical on there and people are going to be drawn to it because people see that there's the fruits that they're seeing from some classical schools. But then, okay, well, what does that mean now? Is that equivalent with the liberal arts, or liberal education, which isn't really necessarily liberal arts? There's different things. Or what about great books? What about original source materials? Where does that fit in? And it's kind of fun to put all of these together to try to get to the heart of what's at the heart of classical education and liberal education. And that just I love it when these things happen. As you start looking at things, you see there's really just one thing that you're considering, because I mean, you can't have true classical education without Catholic education, because man is made to see and know and love God. And that's the end of classical education, is to lead you along that path. And as rational beings, our highest power, the way that we are made in the image and likeness of God, is our intellect and our ability to love that other animals don't have. So it's in the perfecting of those faculties that we become most like God, and we are drawn to love him more. So it's just fun to kind of get all of these things kind of put together. And, we're talking about Ignatian too. And fundamentally, when you get that kind of self-driving sort of thing and clarity of purpose, this is a tangent, but you kind of see that love of learning and of the truth start to come in, because otherwise you can I think back to public school days, and I don't remember anything from most of my classes until unless the teacher could make me the discoverer of something, that they presented this problem or a question of wonder, and then I started to explore it on my own. So they led me, but I was now participating directly, or I was educating myself to a large extent. And that gets lost so much, where it's just like, here's the lecture, here's the test, here's the things. And so that doesn't lead to prolonged learning or knowledge at all, really. Memorization of facts, which is not what we're about here at Kolbe. So it's fun. It's just fun to have the conversations, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And that renewal, that zooming out to the big picture, it's so helpful at this time of the school year when we are kind of closing in on the end of it, and we have got sort of a list of, we need to finish these things to finish this school year. We can be really zoomed in to these particular things, and they can almost kind of lose their connection to each other, whatever, but to then hear this renewed sense of, here's why we're doing this in the first place. Here's our overall picture. This is our long view. And that's helps keep it all in perspective. I think that's so timely, necessary.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm so fortunate to have we've been homeschooling our kids all the way through. And so for our Kolbe families out there, I know this can be a drudgery sort of time where it's just like, let's just get to the end of the school year. We've talked about that a lot, but I just can't imagine what things would, well, I can't imagine what they'd be like without homeschooling, without Kolbe, without things. But, just as my children are older now, I just have such opportunities to sit down and have really deep, meaningful conversations with my children that involve the faith. And so it's intellectual, but then it's working in our relationship with our faith. And it's like, wait, if you watched sitcoms in the 80s and things like I did, you get the impression that really the relationship between parents and children is one of fighting, that there's an opposition. The parents are stupid and the kids have it figured out, and they're just trying to sneak around and do the things that make sense for kids to do, while the stupid fathers, at least, the mothers could be clever or smart, but fathers are traditionally stupid in the sitcoms, and they have a good heart in the end. But just to see that that's not what it's supposed to be like. And of course, everybody knows that, right? We have the Holy Family, and we got Saint Joseph there. We've got the Blessed Mother, and you've got our Lord. That's not division and tension. So sure, there can be tension at times, because as a child, children are trying to figure things out, and you're trying to figure things out as a parent. But it's supposed to be like that. But even though we know that all as Catholics, I mean, if you were to put it in that firm way, people would say, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. But just like everything else, I think it's that slow erosion. And now we think the way sitcoms are, or that what we read in a more modern books, where the kids again are all the smart ones that figure things out, and the teachers or the parents are the dumb ones. And you get that. It's like, yeah, that seeps in, and then you forget, and they don't.
Yeah. Speaking of fathers, I mean, if anyone's listening to this and your own husband, or maybe you're one of the fathers who are listening to this, I think a lot of it has to do with an opportunity, because as Stephen's saying, his own children, he can testify, are joining into the same conversation that he's been engaged in. It's not a different conversation. And and part of what we say, like most broadly, though Stephen and I have been very interested in the particulars, but very broadly, if somebody just doesn't know at all, what we're talking about when we're saying classical or classics, it can mean a lot of different things, but in general, it's returning to the sources, minimizing textbook work, and especially not politicizing things the way that they would be done, like in a public school or even private schools typically. So if you are sending your child to school, they may be getting these messages just like the television gives them. All the Disney movies, the same thing. The dad is always bad. And so your daughters are watching it and picturing that this is what a father is like or whatever. So they sow division between the parents and their children. And I haven't made it there yet. My kids, I'm just glad that they can read and spell decently right now. But I haven't made it there yet. But that is something I'm looking forward to, really, is to have deeper conversations and my children be able to kind of understand what their mom and dad have been about all these years. What have we been doing and why?
Yeah, both my wife and I just feel so blessed to have gone through Thomas Aquinas College. My wife was homeschooled and had a good academic background before that. But that education for me, coming from a public school, was the first time that I really was taught that you can know things, that there is a truth that you can pursue, and then the method that they did, where there was reading original text so that you can see what these great lecturers or great authors were presenting when it comes to various things, but then evaluating what they said. So saying, what did they say, and is it true? And then building on those, being led through the argument of, whether it's philosophy or theology or some of the great works of literature, whatever you're going to get through the years. How does that develop? How does it change? Where do the ideas come from? But being able to evaluate those, then that's been such a huge gift for us that it's hard. I know it's got to be hard when you haven't had that gift, but it's one of the things that's then influenced our parenting, because Maggie and I don't have to say, as long as you're under this house, this is the rule. Well, we could say that, or don't ask questions. This is the rule. We can go back and explain. No, this is why we have this rule, because this is what we're aiming for. And if you don't do this, these are the ramifications of those. So it really gives the child then the vision and the power to choose the right thing. So it becomes much less about, let's try to put up all the walls and stuff so that they can, and they're not going to wander off, but they're seeking, you still put up some walls, but they're seeking the good for themselves. So they're going to be able to accomplish that much better than me trying to run around with them with a stick and make sure that they, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. As soon as I turn my back, they're off doing that. That doesn't happen, as far as I know. But because they know the problems, they know the consequences of what those actions might be. So, or decisions.
Yeah, appealing to their reason as they're able to, as appropriate for their developmental level, like as their capacity to reason increases.
Yeah.
My sister Hope, the Kolbe alumna who helps us here on the Kolbecast team, she has talked about how she enjoyed feeling like she had a seat at the adult table and at that conversation, right? So say that same kind of thing, like you're saying, you've said that also yourselves today, that it's the same conversation. So the kids are in on it this way. And I think that imparts a sense of, it's a sign of favor to the kids to be on, extended that invitation.
Yeah. Yeah. And once if you can build that, it seems to me that, like, okay, so weird conversation that my son and I were having last night, we were delving into serial killers. And,
Okay.
So, you can do the intellectual thing, but one of the things we started, kind of started the conversation was, how could somebody possibly do this? That is, I can't imagine the sort of horror of just, maybe this isn't right for the podcast, but I can't imagine the horror of, like, you've killed somebody, now you have to deal with that in your conscience. But somebody who does it repeatedly, and you're thinking, what's the illness that's there in the mind, or what's the state that they're in. And like he was mentioning, I don't know why my son is studying serial killers or reading about them, but he was talking about a serial killer that had become a Christian, and then he was killed in prison. But to think about, here's somebody who's done all of these horrible things, but as far as we know, he repented. He hated what he had done, and so we could get into the things like, what a relief it might have been to have been caught and to be protected from doing horrible things or whatever. But anyway, so you can talk about the issues and bring in lots of arguments, but also you can bring them back to your faith and talk in a nuanced way. I think where you're bringing in, which sometimes we struggle with, things like justice and mercy, and how can all of those things which are more nuanced, but the Christian faith it's actually fairly straightforward, but it's simultaneously complex. So it's hard to hold all of those things in your mind at once, because we tend to want to focus on one aspect at a time. And
I think too, with somebody your son's age who's made it to this age in life and educational background where he can think in these terms. I wonder if a lot of our students, what they're seeing. I mean, maybe like Hope also saw during her experience, is that you progress almost like history has, in that things are set up where there's the Greeks, and then the Romans, and then Christendom, and the modern period. So it's kind of set up the way. So you've experienced humanity in all these eras, and then you can sort of relate in that way, but you can't lose the category, the Christian and Catholic categories that we have now. So when we look back, we interpret, or if we look at the horrible evils now, they're able to interpret them in that lens as a redeemed humanity and a redeemed person. So then seeing someone like that, like a serial killer or whatever, the how bad and how far out that is from what we expect or our opportunity, it really stands out to kids like that, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, just again, what a great experience when you have a Kolbe child going through the program in your house. Like my son was just down yesterday telling me about the Great Western Schism and all of the different, all the different popes. And I was like, I don't know too much about that. I didn't study that time of history. So, he was able to go through some of the problems and things. And it's like, well, once again, that history that you get and you think, wow, everything's messed up today. And you think, yeah, but everything's been messed up in a lot of ages. So we're broken people, right? We're fallen people. So it's nice to have that context as well, where you're not just thinking either that the world is constantly, everybody's just getting better all the time. We're now so much more virtuous than everybody was at the time of Christ. No, not really, actually. Or it's just falling off a cliff. Everything's just, it's never been as bad as it is today. It's like, well, not so sure that's the case either. So it's nice to have that historical perspective, though, at such a young age.
And speaking of maybe not knowing as much as your kids, I think this is a feeling that a lot of people who went to a public school or didn't have access to this kind of education before. We've been talking about a little bit behind the scenes, just some various ideas to give the parents an opportunity to learn more of these things. And there's ideas like maybe a book club, different things like that. So if any of the listeners are interested, I don't know, Bonnie, would you mind getting email if anybody has some ideas of how they would, or what they'd like to see maybe that can help this?
I certainly would not mind. Please do send us email, podcast@kolbe.org, KOLBE.org. I can hear Mrs. Muth now saying, reminiscing about the naming of Kolbe, and not like the cheese. It's like Kolbe, KOLB. Yeah. Yep. But certainly do. Please write to us, and because we are very interested in hearing what is helpful to people, meeting people where they are, helping them along the way. That's one of the main reasons for this podcast, to just have these conversations to accompany people through their experiences and hear what works well for people, and how the Kolbe experience has served people afterward and so forth. So definitely.
And I always love to think of our homeschooling parents, those who are out there kind of doing it more on your own, because we've got a lot of really fantastic teachers in the online program. And so when you're using your primary educator status to kind of farm some of those services out, you're going to get some really good information from our Kolbe teachers. But when you're thinking about, okay, I'm at home trying to help my child learn, they're going to be largely self-moving, hopefully, like we've talked about, that they're the ones that are actively learning. But you've got to know enough so you can do like what I just did with my son yesterday and say, really, Great Western Schism, what was that about? When did that happen? And where was going? Because I didn't know, and he was able to explain it all to me, so I could engage in a way that from my lack of knowledge, I could engage him, and he could explain things to me, and I was very interested by that then. So I could learn more. I could learn from him. But sometimes it's nice to at least know enough about the things to be able to say, yeah, what did you think of that action by that character in that story? Or do you think that this person was a just person? Did they make the right decisions? And then engage in a conversation where it's more, well, what about this? Well, what about that sort of thing? And so I know for me, I'd love to find ways to make it easier for our Kolbe families to kind of learn some of those, because I know that everybody's busy. I think when we had all small children, I don't think I really read anything of substance for several years. Well, Goodnight Moon was one, and some of the Beatrix Potter books, some of the great books, but for children. But yeah, it wasn't until people were a little bit older that I actually had time to sit down and read at night when I wouldn't just fall asleep immediately. So I understand that. So it's hard as a parent, but
and it's nice different. I think a lot of times we think of things as you see these dads. So my kids play a lot of different sports, and you'll see these dads who really like training their kids, trying to make them better and better. And then I talk to them and I'm like, oh, so you must have played hockey or whatever growing up. And they're like, no. So they don't really have the skills themselves, but they're like, it's almost like they're living through their kid to see this success. And I think that's great. I think that's fine. That's also an opportunity at Kolbe where you're saying, like, you be classically educated, you learn Latin, you tell us what this means. But I think a lot of parents become interested for themselves, and it's not too late. It's not too late to at least be able to get to a certain level in all these things. I tell you, the hardest questions I ever got when I was the foreign languages advisor came from moms who had taught 5-6 kids Latin, and then all of a sudden something strikes them and they're like, wait a second, what is this exception? And it's something really deep in the grammar book that I have to go looking for. And I'm like, wow, that is like grad school classics major type question from this mom who was able to really learn Latin by teaching.
I do hear that a lot from moms about theology in particular, or the religion course in theology. It's like, I learned my faith through homeschooling my child, which is fantastic. That you're right. That should be that's a great thing to do, especially if your education wasn't fantastic.
Yeah.
Do as much as you can to learn along with your children there.
Well, I think some of our conversations, just to throw this in there real quick, is because of Kolbe's outsource option, where you can enroll your children with a teacher, and you can be pretty much hands off if your child is in the online academy. Then it may not afford the same opportunities that we were just describing about homeschooling moms and dads that can learn these things as they're teaching. And that's something that seems that you, especially Stephen, are passionate about, or see the need for something like this as a community builder, and also just to help benefit the families where they get these opportunities if they're not able to get them elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I would love to do lots of these things to kind of, to build up the community, have us thinking about the same things together and talking about it. And, for many people have good Catholic communities around them and they can draw from that, but a lot of people don't either. So I just like the fact that we have a lot of families all throughout the country and through the world that are thinking about the same things that we are, and they're passionate about their faith, and they want some help, though. They want a community to be part of, and they have one. It's just, I want to make sure they've got lots of opportunities to interact with their community, where we don't always have those, feel a little isolated at times.
Yeah, it can be easy to think that it's that the Kolbe families are. It's easy to lose sight of the range of ways that Kolbe families utilize the Kolbe materials as homeschooling, like the traditional homeschool, sort of offline, where the parents are working through the course plans with the students, are sort of directing that to however they work it out at home, all the way to fully online, where the parents don't have the day-to-day involvement. I think for me, so even if I've been through a course plan with my kids, I certainly had that experience myself, learning a great deal more about my faith, working through even the middle school religion courses as homeschool courses with my kids when they were at those ages. I still have some at those ages, but now they're doing online religion. Anyhow, how much I learned for that. But as an example, if a student's working through a particular subject, and I even have a good grasp of that subject, it's just been a while. It just takes me a bit to kind of, okay, hang on, I need to go back and review that a little bit myself, so I don't steer the wrong direction. That can just catch me. I think it's the whole just the uncertain timing that I wasn't really expecting that. My brain is somewhere else, and so I have to kind of change gears for a second. So yeah.
Yeah, my children catch me off guard at times because they'll ask me some of the science, physics, and math questions.
Mm-hmm.
And be like, could you bring me your book?
Right.
It's been a few years since I've taught this before, but yeah, that'll.
Yeah. I do know how to do this, and here shortly it will come to me, but
Yes.
I cannot give it right this second. I don't have it. Yeah.
Yeah. I prefer when they don't bring me algebra 2. It's been a while since I've done algebra just to do algebra. It's like, okay, I can do calculus and I can do these things that were more applied in my engineering field. But sometimes where you get in like, what are we trying to do again here? I'm not sure what's going on.
The nice thing is that you have the whole range of the day, right? So we have those moments that are like, oh, hold on, I need a minute. Then we have the other ones that are on the other end of the spectrum, where we're winning at whatever, where we can be right there and have great conversations about whatever presents itself.
Yeah. Well, I think the conversation is the most valuable thing there. I mean, just the fact that you're talking about it, whether you've got the answer or not,
Mm-hmm.
That's more valuable than having the correct answer every time or knowing everything about the subject. So, that's why I always find, like, when we talk about all of the different ways that you can, even with Kolbe, you've got this whole variety of things that you can choose people to fill in the gaps that you have. But I always have thought that it would be so hard for me to parent by sending my children to a brick and mortar school where they're gone all the day, like I was gone when I was a child, because I tend to delegate and then not pay attention. So I think I would be very inclined to just hand them off and check out. And I hope that I wouldn't, but fortunately I don't have to worry about it. But just the proximity of my children and having them be around, and since I work at home, this is even amplified these days, but it just happens organically and it's easy. I don't have to focus. I don't have to plan out and plot and make sure I'm getting all of these things done. It just happens. And I think it'd be so hard in the other way to kind of stay involved for me. So I'm grateful. That's another reason I'm grateful for homeschooling is I think it makes parenting easier for me than it would be if I chose something else. But
yeah, it all goes hand in hand then as well. You know, the whole day when it's spent together as a family. And I mean, I work out of this office now, and but when we were in other situations where we were home all together the whole time, I miss those days honestly, because everything went hand in hand. Meal times were planned around my work schedule so I could eat with the family, and then everything that happened in the evening, the prayers, all of that, it just felt like each day. That stability is something that I think is so good, rather than the running this kid over here and this one there and put this one over there, and sort of adopting them out for the entire day, and then kind of, you don't know each other that well when you see each other in the evening then, I think.
yeah. Well, I do remember multiple times in my public school education accidentally calling teachers mom, because I was just spending most of my day with them. And so I didn't mean nothing against my mother. I love my mother,
Sure.
but yeah, just that my kids don't even have an occasion to. I mean, maybe the mailman, they could run out and call dad or something. There's no reason for them to do that. So they don't, there's not that they spend most of the time with their brothers and sisters and with their parents. So it's easy.
Yep. Keeps it integrated. Yeah. Well, Stephen, what sorts of things are you looking forward to coming up? You guys have been collaborating quite a bit. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. We'll do another one of these so you guys can tell us more as you've developed Ignatian education principles and so forth. So what else were you looking forward to?
Well, we're approaching our kind of spring meetings with Kolbe, with Kolbe leadership, I guess. So plans always get a little bit more ironed out there. At least you kind of know in general directions. But again, I think that Kolbe's doing a lot of really great things in it right now, and they've got this amazing online program. They're just adding the special services in, some extra tutoring, some extra help. But my hope for the upcoming year is a real focus back on the more traditional homeschooling types, those that are out there on there. And so things like Jordan's talking about, how can we build that community up? How can we give them all of the helps that they need? Helps? I'm not sure if that's right. All of the aids that they need to kind of be successful and have the support that they need. Just like trying to get that extra information in. If you're doing a course in the homeschooling, can we find a way to? Our lesson plans are already good, but can we make it easy for a mom to say, here's some things you might want to think about when you're reading this book. So they can at dinner say, so what did you think about that? And give them a little bit of an aid if they don't have time to read the whole thing or whatever. Really trying to think about the needs of the homeschooling families and focus on that this upcoming year, and the community and homeschool. That's what I'm looking forward to kind of putting more attention on that for this upcoming year.
Okay. That's good. So if listeners have feedback in those areas, feel free to send those our way too. We'll pass those along to Stephen and everybody collaborating on that.
Now, from a personal standpoint, I'm looking forward to lots of travel this summer, because I have to pick my daughter up from the West Coast, and then going out in that same week, I go from California all the way down to Atlanta for graduation. So I'll pick my daughter up, drive with her back, and take my son, go down to graduation, and taking my son up to TAC's East Coast campus for the summer program. But Jordan's close there, so my opportunity to maybe get up and see Jordan in the summer and check out some of those Newman Guide schools up there too, Magdalene and
Thomas More. Yeah.
Thomas More.
Yeah, that is going to be awesome. I'm glad you remembered that part of it, Stephen, because I got your spot reserved here for when you get up here.
All right. There'll be pipes.
Yes, definitely.
Cool. Well, it sure is a joy and a privilege to get to collaborate with you all on this podcast, and I really continue to be super grateful for the opportunity to do that. So thanks for catching up with me here for a bit. Anything else you guys want to cover?
I just want to thank you, Bonnie, for all the work you do for the podcast and for making this available to families and for inviting me and today and join you guys for this special episode. I really appreciate it.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been great. I've been looking forward to it, and I'm glad it worked out. Yeah. Okay, guys. Well, again, listeners, please send us your feedback and what you're looking for, what would be helpful, what you'd like to hear on the Kolbecast. Check out our show notes for links to some of the things we talked about today and the various tributes to Mrs. Muth. Please keep her in your prayers.
Subscribe to the Kolbecast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary our Mother, pray for us. Saint Maximilian Kolbe, pray for us. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam.